Welcome to Singled Out, your 9th best gaming podcast. Please stand by.
Welcome to episode 118. In this episode, Andrew talks to Jason Farley about Pano, how they are played and how a new player can start to play them.
I was 5 and he was 6. We rode on horses made of sticks. He wore black and I wore white. He would always win the fight. Bang, bang, he shot me down. Bang, bang, I hit the ground. Bang, bang, that awful sound. Bang, bang, my baby shot me down. Seasons came and changed the time. When I grew up, I called him mine. He would always laugh and say, remember when we used to play? Bang, bang, I shot you down. Bang, bang, you hit the ground. Bang, bang, that awful sound. Bang, bang, I used to shoot you down.
Hello and welcome to Singled Out, episode 118, the one where we talk about more Infinity. Today I've got Jason on. Hello.
Hello.
Jason's kindly called in from the other part of the world, literally not opposite end of planets to me, to talk about Panoceania. Is that right?
Well, hilariously, as some of the Corvus Belli guys figured out about a year ago now, we are exact antipodes to parts of Spain, as it turns out. Yes. The North Island of New Zealand, basically, if you drill a hole through the world, would come out smack in the middle of Spain. So my place up in Auckland actually isn't too far from Vigo, where the Corvus Belli crew are.
So you and Corvus Belli can make a world sandwich then?
We can, when we want to.
Has to get done. Is it Panoceania or Panoceania or Panoce? How do you say it?
I've always been a believer in the Big Brother Panoceania pronunciation.
Yeah.
Though I've heard Panoceania from time to time, but it just doesn't feel right.
So this is going to be a sort of beginner's introduction to the faction. If you want a more advanced episode, maybe try White Noise. It's pretty good.
They are good, aren't they?
Yeah, they are pretty good. It's also the only Australian podcast I've heard that isn't full of swearing.
Yeah, I've been listening to them and Lots of Lieutenant quite a lot. I find both of those two Australian outfits are pretty good for the more advanced stuff.
I haven't heard that one actually. Is it good? Is it?
Yeah, they occasionally interview one another, and they're well known for their hot takes. A little bit hotter than White Noise tend to be.
You can't beat a good hot take.
Exactly, nice and spicy. like my good friend Vol SC, who will be familiar to many of the international crew from his TTS and YouTube. He's a member of my local meta, and he too is a fan of a nice spicy hot take.
Using his TTS mod quite a lot, really. I mean, my only real games of N4 have been over TTS been a great resource. All the 3D models scanned in and everything else.
Oh, now he would want me to remember. This is where he would correct us because the actual TTS mod was designed by someone else, and he's always very quick to jump in and say, actually, I wasn't the one who designed the mod. But now I can't remember who it is. But Vol would be very quick to jump in this moment and correct us and say, no, it's not his mod. He just ran the 3D model project for
we
it.
apologise, Vol, who almost certainly isn't his. So Panoceania, basically they are the Ultramarines of Infinity, I guess. What's it, isn't it? They're all blue. They kind of
they're probably the Space Marines of Infinity. There's certainly plenty of flavors. But the blue's there.
Certainly fluff waves there certainly aren't, but in terms of a lot of power armor, a lot of high tech stuff. Do you want to give a sort of broad scope idea about first of all, let's go into the background briefly, what the faction is, and where they're from.
Okay, so in a setting history perspective, and I can't resist this as a historian, Panoceania is an alliance which emerged in response to the growing strength of China. So in a very real way, the development of Yu Jing as a force in the world of Infinity creates Panoceania. It's originally Australia, New Zealand, and Indonesia who come together and then pull a number of other countries, including the likes of India and the Philippines, into their orbit as countries scramble to protect themselves from the growing political and economic strength of China. But then Panoceania becomes the hyperpower, as it is called, when it is the first to discover habitable planets. And in the Infinity setting, Panoceania is the only faction to have multiple complete systems under its control. So Panoceania completely dominates 3 whole star systems and then has significant holdings in virtually every other star system.
Yeah, unlike a lot of sci-fi, like Star Wars and Star Trek and so on, not every nation has their own planets, do they? So actually, a lot of them are shared, aren't they? Still.
Yeah, I mean, there's a history of wars called the Neo-Colonial Wars, largely fought between Panoceania and Yu Jing, with varying levels of involvement from the other factions. The first one largely being fought over Svalaheimer, the planet that's split and the system that is split largely between Panoceania and Yu Jing, and then the second one being fought over Paradiso, largely, the other major system that had been split between Panoceania and Yu Jing before the combined army showed up and ruined everyone's party.
So they're kind of the most high-tech of factions. They've got kind of the flashiest toys, haven't they?
Panoceania sits in an interesting place from that perspective because there's always Aleph, right? The super intelligent AI herself has her own military forces, and so the forces of Aleph kind of sit at the apex technologically. But one of the things about Panoceanian society is that Pano is the power that has opened itself most fully to Aleph. So a lot of aspects of Panoceanian society are completely managed by Aleph, and Panoceanians have a very high level of trust for the artificial intelligence and rely on her almost completely for whole sections of operation. Like the Panoceanian power grid is completely controlled by Aleph. Panoceanian communications are completely run by Aleph. Panoceanian traffic and air traffic control is all done by Aleph. Right. So, yes, tactical armored gears are the pocket tanks of the Infinity universe. And that's really the piece of technology that Panoceania is absolutely the best at. Panoceania has the best tags. She has the widest variety of tags. Most of her sectorials have 2 different tags, usually a light tag and a heavy tag to choose from. And those individual tags, pound for pound, are usually better better targeting than their opposition, and for their cost, superior. But generally speaking, the thing that Panoceania excels at is shooting. If you look at a regular Panoceanian line trooper, the thing that defines them is that they have a ballistic skill which is one higher than basically any other equivalent trooper for the same cost. So a 10-point Fusilier has a ballistic skill of 12, whereas an Alguacil, the Nomad Alguacil, will have a ballistic skill of 11. And if we look at the line troopers in Hakislam, or in Yujing, likewise, they're behind in terms of their ballistic skill, and that's the key defining feature that we see reflected across the entire faction. Panoceania is the best at shooting. She has superior targeting technology, often has superior visibility mods. Quite a lot of units have access to MSV units so that they can negate other units' visibility mods, and they will usually have good access to high burst, high damage weapon. Panoceania is the shootiest faction, and in a game that's all about shooting hard, shooting fast, and shooting furthest, Panoceania is the best in what is, to a very large extent,
yeah. So
the most
if it's
important aspect of the game.
I mean, Infinity is largely a shooting-based game. I mean, close combat is there and it's lethal if you manage to get good at it. But it's a shooting-based game. So what stops Pano from just dominating the field if they're the best?
I get the first thing, of course, is an excellent balance in terms of points costs. While Panoceanian units will have that 1 point more ballistic skill, generally speaking, they are paying for it. And those sorts of attribute bumps do end up being quite expensive. So at its peak, at ballistic skill 15, an equivalent Panoceanian trooper is paying around about 6 points more than a matching unit that we might see in another faction at ballistic skill 14, and that ends up being quite significant when you calculate it across an entire force. But on top of that, in return for her peak game peak shooting, Panoceania gives up quite a lot. So Panoceania is designed as a regular fighting force, so she has access to very, very few cheap irregular troops. She doesn't have access to a lot of skirmishers. Strong midfield game can be difficult for Panoceanian armies to put together. She has absolutely no access to warband units. So cheap units that are often effective for trading up are something that Panoceania simply doesn't get access to much of the time. No, not at all. Sometimes we can fake it. We use synchronized robots in a similar fashion. So the Palbot is a heavy flamethrower toting remote that operates alongside a number of Panoceanian units, and that can fill the role of a warband some of the time, but it can't do it entirely, and it is attached often to a fragile unit which you can't afford to throw away. And the other key aspect of the game that Panoceania misses out on basically entirely is smoke. There's a single unit that can fire Eclipse smoke, and that's one of the elite guard units for the Acontecimiento, the Guarda de Assalta unit for the Acontecimiento sectorial, and a single Orcs bot with a ballistic skill of 10 and an Eclipse smoke grenade launcher. It's literally the worst smoke platform in the entire game, and it's literally the only smoke that the entire faction has access to. So, yes, well, I mean, the unit exists again now that Acontecimiento is back. We do have the Guarda de Assalto there once more, as of the November tranche of releases for the discontinued sectorials. But yeah, you can't buy a Guarda de Assalto model at the moment. To be fair, that it was an older model. It definitely needed replacing or updating. But the thing is, basically, Panoceania doesn't have the tools to avoid firefights. If you can face a Pano player down, if you can pull their teeth and eliminate the core pieces that they're going to use to dominate shooting. And, usually, thanks to SWC restrictions, there will be at most 3 or 4 of those long-range, high-burst, dominant heavy weapons. If you can eliminate those, Panoceania is completely shut down. If she can't win long-range firefights, she can't advance because there is no other option.
So if you're a new player and you want to get into this sort of high-tech, high-shooting faction, what's the sort of best way of getting into it?
Well, the Pano starter pack is quite a good place to begin. I used to recommend Operation Ice Storm. I guess now it is Operation Coldstrom. Sorry, Operation Coldstrom. It's a box which comes with a relatively good set of starting units. And while I wouldn't necessarily recommend Beyond Coldstrom for a variety of reasons, my recommendations are usually the same for pretty much any faction. Start with the basic starter pack. The 6 model starter boxes are excellent. There are very few of those that aren't good value for money. Add the support pack and add a couple of boxes of your forces remotes. So in this case, the Panoceanian drone box bot. Box. Sorry, stuttering myself to death. And after that, grab a couple of heavy infantry that you like the look of, because you really can't go wrong. It's very easy to pick up a whole bunch of high-cost, high SWC units very quickly for Panoceania. A lot of those heavy infantry and elite light and medium infantry units are very attractive models, but you'll need to have the basics. You'll need to have your support troopers, your trauma doc, and your machinist, and you'll need to have remotes. You will learn to love Fugazi flash pulse bots and Pathfinder forward observer combi rifle remotes for their sensor and their flash pulse and their mobility. They are fantastic, and though they exist in every faction, they have an especially important place in Pano.
So if you're looking at Pano and you want to play this shooting faction, there's often a lot of talk about vanilla compared to sectorals. So Pano has in production currently 3 sectorials, he says, checking quickly.
3 sectorials. Yep. 3 sectorials in production. Yep.
Military orders, Varuna, and Svalhelmer, and vanilla.
Okay, so controversially, I am going to state that right now, a starting player should not be considering military orders.
Ooh, why's that?
We have been told by Corvus Belli that military orders are receiving an update in 2020.
In terms of rules or miniatures?
And in the state, both. And in the state that they currently exist at the beginning of N4, they are at best marginally playable. And I would consider them to be an army which is really suitable only to experienced players. A new player beginning with military orders right now at this point in N4 is likely to very quickly find themselves frustrated, because many of the most attractive units, which seem like they will be a lot of fun to play, and the most interesting builds which will immediately draw players. For example, Joan of Arc is an excellent elite character who is at home in military orders. There is a special 5 heavy infantry fire team called the Crusade Fire Team, which will appeal to a certain mindset of player. Yeah, exactly. With Joan and 4 Knights Hospitaller. But the problem is that is a terrible formation, which is not effective on the tabletop.
Come on, it's called Crusade. Look at it now. She's got massive swords. Show me you're working here, because look, she's got an explosive sword. She's got high CC. She's Joan of Arc in power armor. She's got 4 of the Knight Dudes with her. How can that be bad? Show you working here.
Okay, so and we're going to get a little technical here. So for those new players, I apologise.
Well, if you're brand new, completely brand new, pause.
But you can hopefully follow along a little at home.
Wiki, read all of that, and then come back in about 5 days.
Well, Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc is a great example of a top-end elite Panoceanian heavy infantry. She's ballistic skill 15. She has... oh, yes, she's absolutely outstanding. But that's what elite Panoceanian heavy infantry have, ballistic skill 15. She's also strong in close combat. She's got CC 23, level 3 martial arts. She has +1 damage on her ballistic skill attacks. Unusually for Panoceania, willpower is normally a weakness, but Joan has willpower 15. She's got armor 5 and BTS 6. She's a monster. She's got a multi-rifle, a nanopulsar, and an explosive close combat weapon. She is a very strong, very flexible unit. Now, if you take her as your lieutenant, and you should, because if you don't, you are missing out on triggering one of her most powerful abilities that you are paying points for. Her inspiring leadership gives every single unit in your army courage, and it turns all of the units in your army that are irregular into regular orders.
So they
this
become
is
normal people. That's
fantastic.
quite a big deal.
Indeed.
They have that in Ariana, don't they, with Wallace, right?
Indeed. Wallace has it in Caledonia, and in Caledonia, Wallace has access to an unlimited number of 6-point nutcase irregulars that he can use to fuel incredibly powerful teams. But here in military orders, Joan has access to only 2 irregular troopers. So immediately, what appears to be an incredibly powerful ability, inspiring leadership, turns out, in fact, only to give her access to a very small pool of additional orders. Plus, if you grab Joan and you, who is 45 points, and then you grab a team of Hospitaller Knights with her, so you probably want a machine gun, you probably want to take a doctor, and you probably are then going to take a couple of cheap boarding shotguns, because at ballistic skill 14, +3 for the fire team, +6 coming around the corner with a boarding shotgun. This is one of the only times in all of Infinity that you can get over 20 with a ballistic skill attack. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing, and it warms the cockles of my Panoceanian heart every time I do it. The problem is that's 173 points. It's a lot. It's more than half of your army. And now that's less than it used to be. It's less than it used to be. And to be fair, this is a unit that covers a lot of the difficulties of heavy infantry formations, because it's very dangerous in close. It's strong in close combat. Thanks to the boarding shotguns, it's got good templates. It's bringing its own specialist along. If you really want to spend more points, you can pull in another character, Gabriel de Fersen, who's also a hacker, who brings also killer hacking, so he can do hacking himself, and he can help protect from hacking too. He's another 50 points though, so he makes it even more astronomically expensive. The problem here is that you're simply putting too much into too small a part of the board. You're leaning too heavily into a unit of troops that have to be offensive, but it's got your lieutenant in it, and while they do have access to chain of command, the chain of command that they have, again, is over 50 points, so it's painfully expensive to be able to field, prohibitively expensive, really. If you're spending 173 points already on your Crusade Fire team, there's no way you can take a Knight of the Holy Sepulchre to back up, really, with chain of command. And so if Joan does go down, you are in big, big trouble. And the problem is that if you buy the starter box, this is the exact fire team that starter box is designed to encourage you into. And it's not good, and it's hard to play. And while an experienced player might be able to get a lot of use out of it, a new player is just going to get
given how people will be attracted towards this shiny box with the living models in, and then realize they can't play.
Yep. They're going to they're being told that they're buying a complete army in a box, and it's very close to being true. But the problem is it's not a very effective army.
So what about
and it will let them down. And so our other options, looking away from military orders, Varuna and Svartalfheim. Varuna was one of the champion armies of N3. She is a relatively strong light infantry focused skirmishing force. And in a lot of ways, Varuna covers off many of the weaknesses of Panoceania very well. Partly that's to do with access to helots, who are an excellent defensive unit and offer cheap troops that can be used ablatively. But really, the champion here is the Kamau MSV2 multi-sniper who can join a core fire team of Fusiliers. In N3, with the addition of Zulu Cobra jammers, Helots, Zulu Cobra and Kamau and a Fusilier team together made for an overlapping defense that was very, very difficult for opponents to overcome.
Yeah, I'm pretty good authority that the Kamau is the second best sniper in the game. So,
they are mathematically equivalent peak sniper in the game. They and the Bolt from Neoterra or from Foreign Company, I think is the other place that the Bolts appear. They and the Bolt sniper are mathematically the single best sniping unit in the game, as long as they're in a full core.
Yeah.
But the thing about N4 is that a number of things actually work against Varuna. For a start off, the Helots, which were a core element of that strong defense I was talking about, are irregular troops. So this is where, for the first time, a Panoceanian force leaned relatively heavily into irregular troops. And with a 15 trooper limit, you can't take 3 of them the way a lot of Varuna lists would have previously. While Varuna didn't necessarily spam orders, it probably leaned into somewhere in the 17 to 19 order range fairly heavily, with the last 3 or 4 of those being quite disposable. And coming in under 15, all of a sudden, whether or not you can include those disposable units becomes much trickier. If you were going to play Panoceania as a new player today, Svartalfheim is probably the place to start. For a start off, Coldstrom is a Svartalfheim starter. It's designed to be a starter for Panoceania, but every unit in that box is from Svartalfheim. And Svartalfheim is the only Panoceanian sectorial that has been specifically designed for N4, and it really shows. Every time you build an army in Svartalfheim, it seems to naturally fit into about 15 orders, and it has access to one of the most ridiculous units that currently exists in the game.
What's that?
In the Feuerbark +1 burst Kahu, which is just bonkers. In an addition where heavy armor has become much more prevalent, a high burst, armor piercing, double action, long range weapon that can be dropped into any fire team because it's wildcard, that has MSV1 so that it can see through other people's vision mods, that has its own mimetism. It's BS13. Every single one of them has NCO, so they can all call on the lieutenant order if they want to. Kahu are amazing at their wild card, so they can go into literally every single team, every single fire team that you want in Svartalfheim. And on top of everything else, they have what is the single most improved and probably single best rule in N4, Climbing Plus.
Yeah, I mean, the bunch of games I've played on TTS recently, Climbing Plus has been just absolutely superb, especially with a good gun, because you can get angles and people that you're not expecting. Superb.
Well, there are a few things that feed into this. One of them is the change to the climb rules in N4. So previously, climbing had a tendency to be difficult and slow. In N4, with one simple change, the fact that if you reach the top, as you are climbing up a wall, as soon as you hit the top of it, you place the unit on top of the wall, on top of the building for free. So you get an inch of movement forward, every time you climb up a surface for free, which makes a surprising difference. But most importantly, it works seamlessly between units that have Climbing Plus and units that don't. Because when you have Climbing Plus, going up vertical surfaces just counts as normal movement. So you can have a team made up of a mix of Climbing Plus and non-Climbing Plus troopers, and some of them can walk around a building while others go up the side, and they can all keep on moving together. And those two things together have made Climbing Plus just incredible in this edition. It is the single skill that I will look for if I am really, really wanting mobility on troopers. And Kahu have terrain total on top of everything else. So yeah, they're bonkers. They are fantastic. You should use them. And as soon as models appear for them, I think that they will sell like
hot. Are they a new unit, completely new unit in N4 then? So there's no version of N3 at all. So there's no.
Well, so Svalaheimer was dropped just before the end of N3, and we basically got told by CB, look, guys, we know this army doesn't really work very well in N3, but it's not designed for N3, so kind of just suck it up. And everyone I know who played Pano basically looked at Svalaheimer in N3 and was like, yeah, this is kind of rubbish. But a combination of small changes to the rules and a combination of small changes to the force when N4 arrived has just transformed them completely. They also have access to some other excellent units. Shona Carano, the character, is a brilliant close combat unit and can be very effective in Svalaheimer. Gunnar Lundmark is underrated by many, I think. He is not well thought of by a lot of players, but again, he's a unit with Climbing Plus that brings tactical awareness, so he's got an extra order, and he can join any fire team, and so can work well. And in Svalaheimer, you get dedicated Orc troopers. So Orcs are the generic heavy infantry that appear in basically every single Panoceanian force. They are as boring a heavy infantry as you could possibly have, basically. The only thing that they have got going for them is that they have 6-2 move now in N4. But they're Armor 4, BS 14, Fizz 14, only Whip 12 and BTS 3. They're dull. They're a dull heavy infantry unit. But in Svalaheimer, there are 3 profiles for them who with Climbing Plus. And in case I hadn't mentioned it yet, Climbing Plus is really good in this edition. So you can combine them together. With our good friends, the Kahu, and another character like Gunnar, or heck, you can run them with other troopers as well. And because the Climbing Plus combines well with troopers that don't have it. And yeah, there are a number of places where Svalaheimer basically just builds really, really amazing fire teams really effectively. And that's such an important aspect of learning to play well in Panoceania, that Svalaheimer is going to be a great place to basically learn the basics, which are then going to be applicable to any other Panoceanian force that you go and play. So I think that right now, Svalaheimer is the best way to get into Pano.
Yeah, I guess all that climbing gives them quite a surprising quantity of mobility. Oh, look at the Boig here, +1 burst.
Yeah, you should stop looking at the Boig. They're awful.
Are they really? What is that?
Well, that's not fair. They're disappointing. So the Boig are the Silhouette 5, which are commonly referred to as super heavy infantry. Yeah. They're the big chunky boys. The disappointing part of the Boig, from a Panoceanian perspective, is that despite being a size 5 super heavy infantry, it brings nothing to the table that we don't have better on existing size 2 regular heavy infantry. So it's Arm 5, but we have size 2 heavy infantry that are Arm 5. It has BS 14, but we have size 2 heavy infantry that are BS 15. Its Fizz is only 13, which is actually disappointingly low for a Pano heavy infantry. It's only got 12 willpower. Now, admittedly, it does have +1 burst on its BS attack, but our Orc Troopers and Knights of Justice can both get that by joining fire teams, which this guy can't. It does have dodge bonuses, which is interesting on a Pano heavy infantry, except some of the knights have dodge bonuses. So, again, not that exciting and duplicated elsewhere on size 2 heavy infantry. And then when it comes down to it, missile launchers at burst 2,
the Mark 12
not a great active turn weapon. Now, the Mark 12 is a little bit of a sleeper. There's some value there. The Mark 12 with +1 burst, that Boy is not a bad option, and it can do some real work. And when I talked earlier about Varuna having difficulty going across the table and engaging at like medium to close range, this is where the Mark 12 Boy with a heavy pistol for when it gets in quite close, that's quite a strong option for just walking around the table and murdering things that are trying to hide. And that one has some value. But at the same time, a Knight of Justice with Spitfire is a size 2 heavy infantry that can do the exact same job. So
we're suggesting not getting the sort of beyond Calstron box because the Boy's in that.
I wouldn't terribly recommend the Beyond Kaldstrom box particularly, especially because the missile launcher Boig is a trap, and that's the one that comes with the box. If you were going to field the Boig, you should be taking the Mark 12.
Yeah. That's one surprising
not
thing
the missile launcher,
game,
so maybe miss out on that box.
Proxy is quite strong in this game because the models can exist.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, you can exactly the proxy rules are so permissive that you can use it as literally anything. And it is the only size 5 heavy infantry for Pano. So if you were going to proxy a Boig with anything else, you'd be looking for something from another faction. But at the same time, one of the other units that comes in the Beyond box is the Locust. Now, I started in NCA, the Neo-Terran Capitoline Army, which is where the Locust originally comes from. And the problem with the Locust is that while it appears on the surface to be a solid skirmishing unit, it's got infiltration, it's got mimetism -6, they have some very interesting loadouts. They don't have camo, which means they don't have a marker state. And the problem with being a skirmisher with no marker state is that you're starting in the middle of the table.
Yeah, they're not
very, very close to the enemy and literally right beside other enemy skirmishers.
Yeah,
they just die. In the first turn of the game, your opponent just kills them, which means that if you don't have the first turn, and with the Panoceanian disadvantage of low willpower, you can't rely on winning lieutenant rolls. Locusts have to be protected. They have to be hidden. And that means you're not taking best advantage of their package of abilities, which is disappointing. And so I find it difficult to recommend them particularly either. Not in Svalaheimer.
So finally, I guess, looking at sort of vanilla,
not when you...
is that a thing worth getting into compared to Sector?
Okay, there are a lot of people out in the community that will tell you that vanilla Panoceania is one of the weakest forces in the game. And to be fair, there are some significant issues with vanilla Panoceania, which basically boil down to, even more so than many other factions, a lot of Panoceanian units are really only good in their home sectorial, because in vanilla they just get completely overshadowed by other similar options. For example, if you are looking for a peak level sniper, then there's basically no point looking at anything other than the Kamau multi-sniper. It has a nearly perfect combination of abilities for an active turn or sometimes an ARO sniper unit. and so there isn't really much point at looking at any of the several other options that are available. If you're looking for an MSV equipped HMG, there's no point looking at anything other than a Svalaheimer Nice HMG. For its points, it is simply better than the other options that are available, which means it overshadows a number of other units that might otherwise have been quite interesting. And a huge amount of the vanilla Pano army list is like this. There are units which in isolation are perfectly fine and interesting options, but in competition with other choices that are available in the enormous range within vanilla Pano, they're simply overshadowed. And so I think the key is, if you are going to play vanilla Pano, then you should have a conversation before you get too deep with experienced Pano players about where are those real winners, because it's easy to come out on the wrong side of some of those. And as I mentioned earlier, Pano needs absolutely dominant peak level long range firepower, because it is the only way the army can advance. If your opponent puts up strong ARO pieces, you have to be able to kill them reliably, and you have to have backup options to be able to do that when the first one at some point inevitably fails you. And that demand for absolute peak level performance also narrows the field. So things like a Nice are amazing. Things like a Swiss Guard with HMG, which again is a hidden deployment hidden deployment mimetism -6 camouflage unit. This one's a heavy infantry. It's again got BS 15, and this is, you compare the Swiss Guard to the Boig. Again, this is an armor 5 unit with BTS 6. This has got BS 15, so the peak level Panoceanian firepower. It's got that superior pH of 14. It's got a heavy machine gun, so it's got that extra range, but it's got mimetism -6, and because of hidden deployment, it can't be attacked at the beginning of the game by your opponent, because it's simply not going to be on the table. And it can use camouflage to bypass opponents that it doesn't want to deal with, and surprise attack to leverage additional advantage against the things that it does want to kill. The Swiss Guard is the kind of peak level offensive predator unit that Panoceania has to lean into, because it's so reliant on shooting and dominating that long-range shooting game.
So you find that basically in vanilla, you only have a certain small sort of set of choices in the first place, rather than having more choices.
Yeah, it's the problem with vanilla is that there is a huge variety of things you could choose, but once again, quite a lot of them, even ones that might initially be attractive to a new player. So, for example, if you have bought the Coldstrom box, you might well consider running it as a vanilla force, and you might take the Knight of Justice that you got in your vanilla box, and you might consider running it as a solo piece. And for any other force other than Panoceania, the Knight of Justice is a perfectly solid solo heavy infantry piece. But in Panoceania, the Knight of Justice simply isn't good enough as a dominant peak level firepower long range combat unit. The Spitfire doesn't have long enough range. Its ballistic skill of 14 with no modifiers to assist simply doesn't cut the mustard when it comes to taking down strong enemy ARO pieces. It's just going to lose too many firefights. And though its armor 5 and BTS 9 are great, if you're losing firefights, you're wasting orders, and if you're wasting orders, then you're losing the game.
That's not worth.
Yeah.
Brilliant. That's a good. Sorry, Carry on.
No. I was just going to say, it's easy for a new player to miss how much better a Swiss Guard is than a Knight of Justice. And sure, a Swiss Guard. So a Knight of Justice is 47 points with Spitfire, and a Swiss Guard is 62. But there's more than a 15-point difference in the performance between those two units.
Any sort of closing thoughts then about people who want to get into Pano?
Get onto the forum, join the Panoceanian group on Facebook. There is a Pano Discord, which and we can include I'm sure we can include the links to all three of those things in the show notes. I would highly recommend seeking out other Panoceanian commanders and having conversations. We have a wonderful community, a really, really supportive group of guys, including incredibly experienced players, the likes of Barakiel from the United States, who is an absolute champion. Michael Delab is a delight and is a genius. And understands this game in a way that I can only dream of. And he's just one example of the wonderful community of people that you would be tapping into who will be enthusiastic to help you. My final tip is true for every Infinity army, but doubly true for Pano. Buy some remotes. They're good, and you need them.
Brilliant. Well, thanks a lot for that. I'm sure we'll talk about it again, and we'll record some more content later on. So thank you, Jason.
A genuine pleasure. Thanks, and goodbye.